This is The Catholic Current with Father Robert Mateiga.
You know that organizing life without Christ, now that we've got more than 200 years of that under our belt and we see what a mess we made, I think we need to try something different. What do you think the role of Christianity should be playing in the rebuild of civilization that I think is necessary?
You're right. I think Christianity is compatible with a lot of these American values in ways that this secular leftist religion, which I think it is clearly not.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert Mateiga of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. As always, let's start with prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Almighty God, through the intercession of St. Ignatius Loyola, we ask that you pour forth your Holy Spirit upon us, a spirit of discernment, that we might hear your voice and obey your command. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, friends, we are in a crisis of masculinity. And by that, I don't mean whatever shall we do with toxic masculinity and all those people suffering from testosterone poisoning. Quite the opposite. We've got to figure out a way to have boys grow up and to be men who can become husbands and fathers and entrepreneurs and soldiers and leaders. We haven't been doing that for a long time for a lot of different reasons. I want to explore that today with my guest. He's a very distinguished novelist, journalist, screenwriter. I want to give just some of the highlights of his distinguished writing career. TV Guide chose one of his Law and Order episodes, Life Choice, as one of the 100 best episodes in the history of television. He received the Edgar Allan Poe Special Award for the Mystery Writers of America. The New York Times has described some of his books as Book of the Year. Books have been praised in the Washington Post. It's hard to keep track of it all. David Black, welcome to the Catholic Current.
Thank you for having me.
David, I was glad to see that you were writing for City Journal. I respect the Journal and the scholars of Manhattan Institute very much, and they're always generous appearing on the show. You wrote an article recently called Men or Boys? Reflections on a Vanishing Ideal. And what really stood out for me was the two photographs. You had Jimmy Stewart in front of a World War II bomber that he piloted, and then there was a picture of a young Leonardo DiCaprio looking really not very much different from older Leonardo DiCaprio, but certainly very different from Jimmy Stewart standing in front of the bomber that he was piloting. What prompted you to write this article?
It was sort of overdetermined. It's something I've been interested in ever since Robert Bly, the poet, started taking guys out in the woods and banging tom-toms. Mm-hmm. And also, I love old movies, and a lot of what Barbara, my wife, and I watch are, instead of watching necessarily a new TV show, we'll watch one of the old great, like Perry Mason episodes or anything with William Powell in it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. I know a cleric who works with seminarians, and he introduced them to the old TV series, The Untouchables, and they were astounded. There were men of principle doing the right thing because it was the right thing, regardless of the cost. And now we have Captain Jack Sparrow, played by Johnny Depp. So I have some sense of where this all came from, or look at pictures of Cary Grant in his heyday and how he dressed and carried himself, and then look at male models today. Something wrong must have gone somewhere. There seems to be a lack of a sense of it's significant to be a man. It's significant to be a man in public, and it required a certain degree of sobriety and competence and purpose. Not so much nowadays. How did we get here?
Boy, that's a complicated question. There's sort of a long-term and short-term answer. I think of the long-term, people, and I got to tell you, I'm going to say things that make it sound like I'm not on the side of feminists, but I am. But I also am not, going to not think about things. And I think that starting in starting at the turn of the 19th or 20th century, when suffragettes were trying to get the vote. What people forget is from then and until fairly recently, women ruled the world, basically, because they ruled their husbands. I mean, the old joke about the husband who says, my wife and I give, blocking the name. Moving on.
Well, I know that this,
I have to say,
my wife and I never disagree. She always tells me what I think. I mean, there are variations of that. I think. Yeah,
that's what the joke was. My wife handles all the detail stuff, like everything that goes on in the world, and I handle the big stuff, like I'll think about what's on the op-ed page of the New York Times. But part of it is because women outlived men and inherited fortunes.
Yes, and part of it was men were able to vote because they fought in wars. Yes. There was a cost. And there's an interesting question of what did it cost, but that's a different topic for a different time. Friends, I'm speaking today with prize-winning novelist, journalist, screenwriter David Black. We're talking about why boys can't become men. David, I remember some years ago watching a television self-described comedian. She said, not all men are bad. Some of them are dead. And everyone laughed uproariously and cheered and went wild. But that couldn't happen the other way around, could it? You couldn't have a man say that about women. Why not?
Well, the glib answer is, I remember years ago reading something where a good case could be made that men and women are different species, and it's complex because on the one hand, I'm a great believer in adapting the NRA, which I dislike, but adapting their slogan. I think the solution for bad speech is more speech. Mm-hmm. And we've gone through a period on both the right and the left when the story you tell, about the world affects how you behave in the world. The story we tell ourselves about Afghanistan affects the stories we tell ourselves about other people, friends, lovers, relatives, is also an important story, and it affects our behavior towards them. Mm-hmm. But more important, the story we tell ourselves about ourselves is the most important. And what people don't realize is you can literally change your behavior by changing your mind, but it takes a little bit of courage and a little bit, and again, as an atheist, I'm saying a little bit of prayer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It certainly takes encouragement as well. And if you're taught as a boy that, for example, everything is your fault, and yet at this, and this was something that I saw during 9/11. They said for just a little while, it was cool to be a burly man with a mustache running into a burning building to rescue people who otherwise would have died. And then that kind of settled down until we needed men to jump out of airplanes and run towards the shooting rather than away from it. And then it was okay to be a burly man again. But I think that there is an animus against masculinity that's not by accident. And I think one of the more reliable ways to kind of breed authentic manhood and the orientation towards manhood out of the generations is to belittle boys for being masculine and to give them kind of a safer, softer, feminine alternative. So a little bit of Ritalin and a little bit of Leonardo DiCaprio, and we're off into the androgynous nirvana. Am I being jaundiced in looking at it that way?
I don't think so. I'm not a baby boomer. I'm the last of the war babies, and I identify, even though I was a hippie and I lived in a commune, I identified more with the tail end of the previous generation. And in the 50s TV, fathers tended to be shown as doofuses, incompetent, incapable, like The Life of Riley. Father Knows Best wasn't quite as damaging as a male model, role model. But I'm sorry, my COVID booster shot has given me tinnitus in my ear.
I'm
so
sorry.
Sometimes I lose track.
Well, let me interject one thing right before the break is maybe talk about fathers in television and moving from Leave It to Beaver to Homer Simpson's.
So why?
We can take up the thread of that in the next segment because we're up against a break. Friends, when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with prize-winning journalist, author, screenwriter David Black. We're talking about his essays about why boys can't become men. In the next segment, we're going to ask, is it enough for a man to be nice? Short answer is, I don't think so. Remember, our rallying cry here at the Catholic Current is Christus Mundo, Mundus Christo, bringing Christ to the world and the world to Christ. We do it because our Lord says so, for the greater glory of God, the love of our neighbor, and the salvation of our own soul. After the broadcast today, go to thestationofthecross.com, get our resources list, download our audio as podcast. Together, let's take this conversation around the world. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
The universe is filled with order from top to bottom. And it's a beautiful order. And not only is it beautiful, it's order that we can actually comprehend. And it's almost as if we have been made to be able to comprehend that order in the universe, to be able to contemplate it so that we can see maybe that purpose behind it.
Please visit Father Spitzer's website, magiscenter.com, to watch this beautiful and important video about purpose and God's creation. That's magiscenter.com.
You're listening to The Catholic Current with Father Robert Matague from the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. Stay connected with the show, our guests and topics, by following the show on Twitter and Gab. Just search for The Catholic Current.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert Matague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross studios, your local radio station and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. We're talking about why can't boys become men. My guest is David Black, prize-winning author, journalist, novelist, screenwriter. We're talking about an article that he wrote in City Journal. David, at the last time we were talking about depictions of men, and especially fathers, in the 1950s, and that fathers were primarily portrayed as objects of humor, maybe well-intentioned, but really not competent or capable. And we were talking during the break, this has something to do with the aftermath of World War II. Fill us in, please.
In 50s TV, fathers would possibly, Father Knows Best is an exception, fathers were presented as fools, as incapable, as, like The Life of Riley, or they were presented as not good role models. They were fools, and usually the mothers were the ones who sort of kept everything going. Why? Well, when all the soldiers came back from World War II, the secret they didn't want to talk about, and a lot of people in that generation won't talk about their wartime experience, is that they had blood on their hands. They were taught to kill, because that's what soldiers do. But when they came back, a TV show showing it would take into the late 70s for even people to assume that a TV show could have such an effect on the culture. And it was a way of disinfecting the vets who came back and who did horrible things in the war. And so a TV show back then, you had a choice of presenting a father figure as someone who had a bloody past in another country, or a fool. And I think the country was not ready to deal with looking squarely at a war and how horrible it is. The Vietnam War ended because Walter Cronkite showed it on television. So I think that, along with the fact that the suffragette movement was had been very successful, they got women to vote, and then in the 50s, women sort of were seen as more rational than these guys who came back from combat who were fools. So that's the sort of historical context. I think the and speaking more to the specific subject, that was how young men began thinking, well, maybe the traditional kind of war hero father is not acceptable. And with the Vietnam War raging and that on TV, all the things that the features of manhood, war is glorious, etc., went bust. And then the feminist movement came in and rightfully were demanding equal pay for equal work and equal access to graduate schools. I believe now there are more women in medical school than men. And in my memory, a medical school might only take 2 women. Right. So the powers are shifted a little bit there. And then coming up to the present time, part of it is just the old reporter, and I started out as a reporter. The old reporter line: if it bleeds, it leads.
Right.
So you began hearing stories about horrible stuff that men did, and Andrea Dworkin basically said all males are rapists. Period.
Right, and and eventually that begins to trickle down from rarefied professional journals and into our schools and our popular culture. David, what do you think about this? That I think one of the reasons why the culture tries to emasculate men is that it doesn't want to confront the power of masculine grief. I mean, historically, we ask men to do horrible, difficult things, to step outside and face the grizzly bear, to run into the burning buildings, or to go out and kill people in large groups. And even if you do argue that sometimes civilizationally that's a necessity, we never ask about what does that do to the masculine psyche and the masculine soul. We don't want to come to terms with the fact that a lot of our civilization is built on men making unsung, very terrible sacrifices. And so rather than look at that, we eliminate men, we buffoonize men. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're right. And I think AIDS also has to be factored in. I did, for Rolling Stone, I did a long 2-part piece on AIDS, which I had researched for a year. I started researching before it was called Grid. But the story that no one told is what happens to a generation, my children's generation, when they hit puberty and below puberty, and instead of associating sex with procreation or sex with pleasure or sex with, after AIDS, it was sex equals death. And I know 2 of my 3 children, when they dated when they were in high school, they didn't date. They dated, the group of kids would get together, but it wasn't like the 1950s dating, which I remember, where one-on-one. And I think that added to it, added to the whole. If you have to be afraid of sex because it's equivalent of death, how does that affect men and women? And a lot of the issues that we think of as male issues, a man's got to do what a man's got to do, are shared with some women. I mean, in Greek drama, I'm forgetting her name, Orestes' sister. Anyway, she buries her brother, even though the authorities said you can't do that. And that's a woman's got to do what a woman's got to do. So there are this isn't, my reaction wasn't to negate others' definition of who they are in terms of gender. I think that's a puzzle for me. I think sex is a fact. We're born with certain organs, and so sex is real. Gender is, as you can tell just from reading newspapers, it's a complicated issue today. And so I think age had an effect. I think then when women were allowed into the military, and that's something I was in favor of, but it also changed the kind of you're probably too young to remember Black Hawk comic books. It was a group of World War II soldiers, and it was melting pot America. There was one WASP, one Jew, one black, one American Indian, and so we've always had a kind of multicultural attitudes in this country, but the things began going awry. Part of it just was, there's this whole phenomenon of guys who can't get dates. And
the incels, the involuntary celibates, yes.
And that if you've got if it's hard for women to find men who reflect traditional male values and aspects, that had an effect on everything too. And then because if you can't date a woman, how do you find intimacy, physical intimacy? Well, it leads to experimentation, and all this is good in a way. As I say, this cure for bad information or bad talk is more talk, not less talk. But I remember coming through the early feminist movement in the 70s and maybe even the 60s it started. And I remember being baffled. I remember holding a door open for a woman and she slugged me.
Oh,
not slapped, hit me in the chest. Didn't hurt, but that was fascinating to me. The male behavior has become, I gotta say, demonized. I mean, and again, I'm somebody who believes in the good part of feminism, but men don't know how to respond anymore. I mean, I've been married for 25 years, and before that, my previous marriage was 24 years. So I've never really dated, but I have two daughters, and I wish them to break every glass ceiling they can. But it's instead of re-empowering women, it's disempowering men, and men and boys in classrooms are being punished for obstreperous male behavior. I mean, a little testosterone poisoning. I mean,
right. And then, hey, a boy isn't acting like a girl, so the thing to do is to drug him, to give him Ritalin. And we talk about, everyone of every conceivable group needs a role model that they can identify with, unless you're a healthy male. That we don't want to have that, because by definition there is no such thing as a healthy male anymore. And I believe that's going to have a terrible, terrible cost in our culture and our society. And I have a friend who was a prison chaplain for many years, and he said there's no more useless holiday than Father's Day in a men's prison, because these guys almost inevitably have no relationship with their father, and they haven't been initiated in the rites of passage from boyhood to manhood. Friends, we come back, we continue our conversation. Prize-winning author, journalist, screenwriter David Black. We're talking about why boys can't become men. In the next segment, I'm going to ask him, is Peter Pan going to get us all killed? I'm keen to hear his answer. After the broadcast today, go to thestationofthecross.com, get our resources list, download our audio as podcast. Wherever you can find audio, you can find us. Don't just download it. Follow us on your favorite platform, write a 5-star review. We need to get the attention of the algorithms so that these conversations get the attention they deserve. Take it to your family and friends, and together we'll take it around the world. Let's get busy. We'll be back in just 2 minutes. Please do stay with us.
This is The Catholic Current from the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. Catch up on an episode you've missed or share them with your family or friends. The Catholic Current is podcasted wherever you enjoy listening: Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTeigue of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. My guest today is David Black. He's a prize-winning author, a journalist, screenwriter. We're talking about his recent essay about why boys can't become men. David, Peter Pan was the little boy who would never grow up, and that might make a charming story up to a point, but that's got a catastrophic cost for our culture. When I was a university professor for many years, and there were a lot of young males there. A friend called them boys who shave, who just weren't ready for adult life. They didn't know how to win the heart of a real woman, to be prepared to start a family or a business or step up and take responsibility in their community. Some of them tried and they flailed and failed. Others ended up in a corner with pot and pornography and video games. A lot of the young ladies would cry out, where are all the good men? And one of my colleagues said, well, there are no good men because the worst aspects of feminism killed them. What are your thoughts? What is the social cost in not teaching boys how to become men?
Well, they don't become men. I think and part of it is performative. I remember Cary Grant, who you mentioned. Someone once came up to him and said, "God, I wish I were Cary Grant," and he said, "So do I." And we don't. I mean, we don't have. Maybe Clooney, I think, is a good. And this isn't to say we don't want people like Ryan Reynolds, who is a brilliant actor and comedian, but it's a very different model than the Jimmy Stewart. And by the way, Jimmy Stewart, I believe, was the first American actor to sign up for the military. Mm-hmm. And he really did do bombing missions, and lots of them.
Yeah, and he attained a high rank, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he was a colonel. I can't remember, major.
Yeah, he might have been a general. Yeah.
I don't know if he was a general. But it's possible.
I don't see a lot of leading Hollywood men trending in that direction today. So boys don't grow up. They don't know how to be men, whether that's disincentivized or beaten out of them or so on. But then that kind of incapacity to be a man and to teach other boys how to become men that incapacity is handed on to the next generation. And then you've got boys trying to figure out manhood on their own, and they either put expectations on women that women really aren't meant to carry, or they try to initiate each other with gang culture, for example. I mean, and there was a time when not only, say, the military or the police, but also religious communities could take a boy 17, 18 years old on the threshold of manhood and make him a hero ready for mission and service and sacrifice. And a lot of that seems to have gone away now, and we're floundering. What does this do to us socially, and what does it do to us in terms of family life?
Again, I mean, these questions are so complicated because it's part of it is, I remember with the original or the feminists I grew up with, who, you know, many of whom were baby boomers, but when it first started, the women's consciousness raising groups, they seem to feel, and this may be a bad metaphor, but they seem to feel that it wasn't about them taking their own power. It was about men stepping back from power, and that left a void that women didn't fill. Mm-hmm. It would be better, you know, if everybody was empowered, men and women. And there also is the divide and conquer aspect that to a certain degree there are some people in the world who recognize that you know, a popular front as there were in the 30s, they don't want that to happen, so they and this goes back to Vietnam era, there was an effort to set the hippies against the blue collar workers. Mm-hmm. And men against women, and et cetera, because divide and conquer. Right. So I don't think it's a matter of saying we shouldn't have Leo DiCaprio's as role models, but we also need more George Clooney's, because it's the question, what is a man or what is a woman? I mean, it's there's so many different ways of looking at it, and each way of looking at it gives you a different response. And I think it's incumbent on us to question the orthodoxies of our time. I mean, I remember back in the 50s when I first started as a writer. I believed that it was important to see through the conventions of my generation, and it's complicated. And you know, I remember the one of the sort of main responses to male-female behavior was. Part of it had to do with also the workforce, women entering the workforce in World War II, mm-hmm. So it's complicated. I mean, my father grew up in an orphanage, and he was a tough guy. He was also a gentle guy. I never heard him raise his voice, or never heard. And he only slapped me one time when I punched my older sister. We were both very young, and he grabbed me and walloped me and said, "You don't hit women." But mm-hmm. he was a model of a that generation, the greatest generation.
Sure. Well, that sounds very much like my father too. He's a World War II vet, blue collar worker. The measure of a man was how he treated women. He adored my mother, wouldn't tolerate vulgar language in the presence of women ever, and it was just part of the era that you breathed. And then those those conventions began to break down. And I noticed you said in the last segment that men just didn't know what to do anymore. Do you stand up when a woman comes into the room? Do you open the door, etc.? And I think the exasperated response now is what's called MGTOW, MGTOW, men going their own way. That there's just too many disincentives to get involved with women. If you date a girl in college, she might accuse you of rape, and then your life is ruined. You get married. Marriage is an unenforceable contract, but you're on the hook for alimony for the rest of your life. The courts favor women in child custody suits, etc. It seems that culture and law are stacked against men, and that some males are just opting out. Have you observed that phenomenon also?
Well, yes, but I think partly we got to renegotiate the social contract, and it's not about taking power away from women. It's let women have as much power as they can have, but don't take it away from men. And if women want to. Antigone buries her brother. It's
right.
Gal's got to do what a gal's got to do.
Right. Buried Oedipus.
So it's not about disempowering men. It's about empowering everybody, and more distinctions, not fewer distinctions, but no judgment about distinctions. I think that would resolve a lot of the issues, but. But I got to say, it's what we think of as old-fashioned male behavior also applies to old-fashioned women behavior. I mean, women did not swear, and there seems to be the difference between blasphemy and just objectionable talk. It leaves men in a position, and there are fewer women for them to date. It leaves them in a position where they don't know how to go on a date. They don't know how to ask a woman out on a date. They don't know how to behave on a date.
Right. I've had students tell me they'd rather text than talk on the phone because talking on the phone is too intimate. It is too vulnerable. And when I started teaching college almost 30 years ago, it was an open secret then that there were more qualified women coming into college than men, and we had to tinker with the admissions policy to have some kind of rough parity. And that ship has sailed now, and there's such a significant difference between the number of men applying to college and the number of women that women are looking around and say, who is going to be in my social and academic strata whom I can marry? And the answer to that question isn't obvious. If left to continue, where do you think these present trends are going to trend towards?
I was I'm trying to remember what my wife and I were watching last night. I can't remember, but we had a discussion about exactly what you're asking. I think we're going to go into. I mean, I told my wife if she ever sees me wearing sweatpants during the day and I'm not in the gym, shoot me. But we're entering a period where I think elegance is going to come back, elegance and politeness, and it's all part of it goes back to Thorstein Veblen. The secondary benefits of various economic and political and social behavior.
Right.
So I have a feeling just because the pendulum swings, it's no longer, you can't get a rise out of somebody, using foul language the way, now it's just become common speech. And I think the pendulum is going to swing back in the other direction where people, they learn how to be not merely mammals. Humans are mammals, and mammals are all about territory and pecking order. Mm-hmm. And what we have to do to be human beings is to get beyond that. Get beyond mammal or reptile, mammal midbrain or reptile lower brain behavior, and learn to yield. I think this is, just when I started driving back in the 50s, everyone yielded. Maybe it was because they were afraid they were going to get hit or this or that, but road rage didn't exist.
Right.
And so the more normalized male behavior became impractical, is that the word? The more, I think, men began burying rage that would come out in an improper way.
Well, we have challenges ahead of us, and I don't know that we're well equipped to face them just yet. Friends, in the next segment, my guest David Black and I are going to be talking about how to raise boys to become men, some practical advice and some cautionary tales. After the broadcast today, go to thestationofthecross.com, get our resources list, download our audio as podcast. Be part of the conversation. Follow what we're following by following us on Gab. That's gab.com. Our channel is The Catholic Current. Everything you need to take this conversation to your family and friends, we give to you. Together, we really can take it around the world, and we need to, and we certainly cannot do it without you. Friends, we'll be back in just 2 minutes. Please do stay with us.
There's no better way to start your day than with spiritual formation from inspiring priests.
It's the church that, admittedly, is filled with so many sinners. In fact, everyone who enters it is sure to be one. But upon entrance, he becomes a child of God, a member of God's family, the church, founded by Christ, and equipped by him with all the necessary help to make sinners into saints.
That's Sermons for Everyday Living, weekdays from 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern on the Station of the Cross.
After today's broadcast, go to the Catholic Current show page on thestationofthecross.com for info on today's guests, the show resource links, and to sign up for our weekly email of upcoming shows.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. My guest today is distinguished prize-winning author, journalist, screenwriter David Black. We're talking about his recent essay regarding boys becoming men. David, I think of Mark Twain's observation that everyone complains about the weather and no one does anything about it. We've been talking about shortfalls in teaching boys to become men. We've talked about the ill effects that come from that. What are some practical things to do? My own take on it is you've got to be really careful about who and what you let into your home, either through your front door or through your electronic devices, and that you've really got to communicate to your kids, you are worth my time. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that letting kids know that you're worth my time is absolutely necessary. I mean, kids... And I can remember back to when I was a kid, and I could tell which adults were interested in what I had to say, and which adults were just manipulating me to, for their own,
Right.
I remember. Well, I won't tell that story because it's libelous. So.
Good call. So and I think parents don't know where to turn. I mean, you and I are old enough to know that there is some perennial wisdom out there. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. What do you think would be the good sources for beginning parents who want to learn how to raise their boys to become men?
Well, when my two kids were very, very young, I mean, toddlers, Christmas morning, there was a bicycle under the tree and a dollhouse. Mm-hmm. And even though these kids had been brought up, to be more open to, it's okay for a boy to play with the dollhouse. It's okay for a girl to have a bike. But, in fact, my daughter went to the dollhouse and my son went to the bike. I mean, it's bred in the bone in a way. But I would just, when I was going through a very difficult time, somebody told me, they said, if you're on an airplane and the pressure, you lose pressure, you put the mask on yourself first before you put it on your loved ones, because if you're not okay, they won't be okay. Mm-hmm. So I think part of the solution is really just, in a way, it's follow your heart. I know that sounds, in a way, it's a dodge, but I don't know a better response. I mean, follow your heart, and we're on this planet for such a short time. The one thing we know we can do is to be kind. Right. And I think kindness, it begins with kindness. It begins with disarming the battle of the sexes to the extent it can be. Maybe it can never be completely.
Dealing with fallen human nature, conflict is inevitable. There was a poet who said, "Twixt inference and implication, 'twould take a Solomon to span the rift of interpretation between a woman and a man." I want to take up your thread about following your heart. As a Catholic philosopher and theologian, I immediately think of natural law and say, follow your nature. Yeah. Do what comes naturally to you as a man or as a woman. Bishop Olmsted of Phoenix said that a man receives love by giving love, and a woman gives love by receiving love. So that very fundamental orientation of the outward and the orientation towards the inward momentum, those basic things have to be seen. And so I think we also need to start looking at older books, older stories, older artwork. C.S. Lewis said, given we live in a world with very dangerous enemies, shouldn't kids be raised with some stories of chivalry and heroism? I think that family life is ill-served by this postmodern detachment, cynicism, the whimsical anti-hero, the Captain Jack Sparrow, or even Heath Ledger's The Joker. Why so serious? Are there older archetypes that we can draw on usefully today?
Well, I think the traditional Western movie up until the 60s, they were heroes, and in some cases they were slightly flawed heroes like John Wayne and The Searchers, but they were heroes. And I think in some way we've become embarrassed by our heroes. Mm-hmm. Or the feeling, I guess, what militates against clarity about heroic behavior. I love the Marvel and DC movies, but you don't have to be a superhero or a mutant to be a hero. The heroism of everyday life, the heroism of just, when I go into the supermarket, I see guys, I'm 76, and I'm still working, but I'm working at something I love. I write. I see guys my age who are on the checkout counter because they can't make enough money to survive their retirement. Right. And those are heroes. Those are heroes, and we have to first acknowledge all work is honorable. All work is honorable, and that's something that changed. I remember I grew up in a middle-sized city, Springfield, Massachusetts, about 300,000 population. But everybody, and back then they even had a man who delivered the ice, and the guy who went from street to street to sharpen scissors and knives, and with a little portable grinder. They're heroes. They're heroes, and women who are also heroes or heroines. but we have to learn how to accept the dignity of all people, male or female. And a lot of traditional male behavior comes down just to being willing to yield, to being willing to say, okay, I'm here to do what has to be. Well, it's the Western hero. Who was that masked man? At the end of the movie, the hero moves on.
Right. He's not looking for accolade or compensation, but the man steps up and does what needs to be done and pays the price so that the weaker and the vulnerable don't have to pay that price that shouldn't be theirs to pay anyway. And somehow we need to recover that lost wisdom. And I think that recovering that lost wisdom is not just philosophical, it's cultural, it's spiritual, and I'm happy to say there are great theological resources for that. David Black, thank you for being a very fine guest today here at the Catholic Current. I hope we can have another conversation again soon.
I would love that.
I'm Jesuit Father Robert McTague. You want to join us tomorrow? It's Timely Tuesday. We're going to be welcoming back David Morrison from Blue Collar Logic. I'm going to ask him whatever happened to the culture wars. After the broadcast today, go to thestationofthecross.com, get our resources list, download our audio as podcast. Everything you need to take this conversation to your family and friends, we give to you. Together, let's take it around the world. Through the intercession of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, may God our Lord surround you with a legion of guardian angels to protect you from all harm and every evil till you reach the happiness of heaven. May mighty God bless you, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Go in peace, and please pray for me.
Thank you for listening to this podcast brought to you by thestationofthecross.com, a listener-funded nonprofit organization. Please prayerfully consider donating at thestationofthecross.com by calling 1-877-888-6279 or through our free iCatholic Radio mobile app.